I think for interfaith families, often the challenge is coming primarily from outside the family, outside the inner family, the nuclear family. Often it's either an extended family member, a religious institution, friends who don't understand, clergy who don't understand, who are challenging the family and saying, you can't do both. Interfaith families are not a good idea. You're going to confuse your children. A lot of these myths, as I see them. And the benefits are more internal. The benefits are this feeling that love can cross boundaries, and that love crossing boundaries creates peace crossing boundaries, that as interfaith families, we are modeling peacemaking. We are interfaith ambassadors in a way. And to me, this is very inspiring, and this is part of my work.
Dynamic biblical discussions with special guests exploring tough biblical issues, academic scholarship, ethics, archaeology, textual criticism, Old Testament, New Testament, Bible interpretation, apocalyptic literature, Christian history, ancient Near East cultures. You're tuned in to Conversations with Pastor Cliff on Puluso Ministries.
Good day, everybody. Welcome back to another episode on Conversation with Pastor Cliff. Today, I have a wonderful guest, and her name is Susan Katz Miller, and she has written a great book called Being Both. Susan, I know you've also penned another book on the interfaith family workbook that you have penned in 2019, and I think it will be very fascinating to talk about, these two books that you have penned in your journey as a religious scholar and activist. Welcome, Susan, to Puluso Ministries and Conversations with Pastor Cliff.
I'm very glad to be here this morning.
Thank you. I know we're going to have a stimulating conversation on these books you have penned, and I know they've been powerful to me as I went through them, particularly Being Both. Perhaps before we dive into this conversation, Susan, I would like you to maybe give a bit of a background as to who you are and what has inspired you to write this book that encapsulates so many experiences of people who find themselves in these interfaith religious communities and families.
Sure. So I'm an interfaith child. I was born into an interfaith family with one Jewish parent and one Christian parent. So these are issues that I've been living with all of my life. And I'm a journalist by background. So I thought this would be a good topic for a book. And so when I went to write Being Both, Embracing Two Religions in One Interfaith Family, I drew on my own story, which was, growing up in an interfaith family, and then with my husband raising two children who are now adults. And I also drew on research that I did. I had a survey of over 200 parents in interfaith families and over 50 young people who grew up in interfaith families. And these are specifically interfaith families who decided to raise their children with both religions. So to provide an interfaith education to their interfaith children. This is a newer and growing movement, a grassroots movement of families that really want to honor and pass down both traditions. And that is the choice that my husband and I made with our children. So I have lived experience with the pathway that my parents took, which was to choose one religion for your interfaith children. I was raised with a Jewish education and a Jewish identity because my parents made the decision that that's what they thought would be best for our family. And then in the next generation, my husband and I made a different choice, which was to raise our children with both. So I'm a middle generation of a 3-generation interfaith family is the way I look at it. And that those experiences informed my work in both of my books.
Fantastic, Susan. you seem to draw a lot from your book, from your personal experience as from your Jewish background, but you also merge it when you marry your husband into this Christian background that you kind of merge together when you guys come and formulate a family. And tell me, to what extent has your personal experience played a significant role in you easily, being able to forge this relationship with your husband from two different backgrounds to make it kind of work for you?
Yeah, my experience informs all of my work, of course, as it does with everybody. One of my motivations is that a lot of the literature that had been written about interfaith families was very negative. The narrative was that it's going to be difficult, it's going to be challenging, it's not good for Jewish institutions, it's not good for religious institutions in general. And that was not my experience growing up or with my husband. I have found being part of an interfaith family to be something that's joyous, that is intellectually stimulating, that has pushed me to be a peacemaker and an activist. And so I wanted to have this other viewpoint represented in the literature. And that's what stimulated me to write Being Both.
Uh-huh. I know this topic is quite diverse. I mean, I had a guest, I think a week ago, on from an African traditional background, and she spoke about merging her Christianity and her African traditional background as a family, and it's a common practice, particularly here where I find myself in Africa. Um, I want, in your experience, I want to understand how easy or difficult was it for you to encapsulate all these different diverse experiences into this unique voice that you kind of bring out in your book with interfaith religions, in particularly in households.
Well, you bring up a very good point, which is that I have come to see interfaith families who want to celebrate both traditions as part of a global um, reality, which is that many, many people around the world draw on more than one religious practice in their homes, in their families, in their identities. And part of this is the history of colonialism, part of it is a history of just different religious communities living side by side and overlapping. Um, and I was very fortunate because my husband and I were able to spend 3 years in West Africa, in Senegal, which is a predominantly Muslim country. And we also spent 3 years in northeastern Brazil, which is a predominantly Catholic country. But in both of those places, I saw people drawing on indigenous religious practice, African, or in the case of Brazil, African diasporic traditional practices, and the Abrahamic traditions, in particular Christianity, but also Islam in Senegal. And I think this helped to open my mind to the idea that being a multiple religious practitioner is not something that is marginal or impossible or unusual even, but that it's actually quite common around the world. And here in the United States as well, we have people who practice African diasporic religions and Christianity, particularly in New York, in Florida, along the whole East Coast, but increasingly around the country, where a lot of Black Americans are reclaiming their African diasporic heritage. And we also have people who are indigenous, Native Americans who have traditional practices and practice Christianity. So the idea that an interfaith family might want to practice more than one religion is not so shocking when you think about all of the people around the world and the country who are practicing more than one religion or drawing on more than one religious heritage.
Uh-huh. I think you bring out a very significant point, because a lot of us, particularly from my context, we kind of exposed to various religious traditions, and we know in many countries in Africa, for example, and Brazil, as you mentioned, and other Eastern countries, they don't see these categorizations that are pretty much used in the West, where you got to be a Christian and only that, or a Muslim and only that. But also that brings a difficulty, because we know that many of us are not actually one religion at all. We actually double dab or sometimes triple dab, but sometimes we're not even conscious that we are doing that, because we are a product of a particular time and context and have been socialized into these traditions and religions. You discuss in your book that there are challenges, of course, and benefits in one practicing an interfaith religion, or trying to bring up an interfaith family. How would you say those benefits are and challenges that one is likely to encounter when they're trying to set up a family like this?
So, when you're part of an interfaith family, you have various choices. You can choose, your religion, your partner's religion. You can choose both. You can choose no religion. You can choose a new religion that you convert to together. Or some people um, practice traditions of many religions, not just the two in their family. So these are all choices. And what I say is each of these pathways has benefits and each of the pathways has challenges. They're just different on the different pathways. There's no way to solve the problem of being an interfaith family, because to me, it's not a problem. It's not something that needs solving, but also that interfaithness is always going to be there. So, children, for instance, people worry about how this will affect the children. Children know that they are part of an interfaith family. Even if you raise them exclusively with one religion, they're going to have extended family, aunts, uncles, grandparents practicing the other religion. And they know these things. And they are formed by the sounds and smells and tastes and customs and foods and rituals and stories of both religions. There's no way to really prevent that. So to me, it's a myth that you can raise an interfaith child exclusively in one religion, even though our Abrahamic traditions push you to be exclusive, to only have the one. The other is there. It's a reality. And I experienced this because my parents tried to do the right thing. They tried to raise me with only one religion, but inevitably, I knew the other religion was there. So I've had a lot of decades to think about what the benefits and challenges of all that is. But I think for interfaith families, often the challenge is coming primarily from outside the family, outside the inner family, the nuclear family. Often it's either an extended family member, a religious institution, friends who don't understand, clergy who don't understand, who are challenging the family and saying, you can't do both. Interfaith families are not a good idea. You're going to confuse your children. A lot of these myths, as I see them. And the benefits are more internal. The benefits are this feeling that love can cross boundaries, and that love crossing boundaries creates peace crossing boundaries, that as interfaith families, we are modeling peacemaking. We are interfaith ambassadors in a way. And to me, this is very inspiring. And this is part of my work.
You bring out a key thing as you speak, that a lot of people would say this is going to be confusing to kids that are probably in a setup where there's the promotion of interfaith, and also if you look back, particularly from a Christian perspective, a lot of people think when they are engaging maybe the biblical corpus that they are looking at a particular Christianity. But you and I know that you have a spectrum of intersections there, of Christianities in the plural sense, when you're reading whether the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Bible. So you don't have this monolithic view of this one religion. We have already this intersectionality within the the text itself, if you coming from a Christian background anyway, or even a Jewish background anyway, because we have all these influences that are being shaping these communities from the ancient time to our current context. But now we know that many of communities and these religious spaces are more of a sense of identity. So how does one then navigate this whole sense of belonging to a particular community and identifying oneself?
Okay, so there was a lot in there. First, I want to address directly the confusion myth. We often say the confusion is in the eye of the beholder, because children, when they grow up with parents from two religions or two religious identities or heritages or backgrounds, for the children, it's very natural. They don't see it as a problem. They just know that that is their natural state. And they're not confused about it. They're not confused about learning about more than one tradition. Um, it's more people who grew up in a single tradition who find it confusing because they can't imagine what that would be like. But for the children, it's very natural. Um, and as you pointed out, there are a huge variety of beliefs, not just within Christianity, but even within, say, one Christian denomination. So
Mhm,
you can have two parents who are both Presbyterians, but they don't necessarily have identical beliefs about anything, or they don't necessarily have identical backgrounds and family history and practices about how they do holidays or how they pray or how they want to be involved with the church or not involved with the church. All of these are things that a couple has to work out between them, whether they're an interfaith couple or whether they're a same religion or monofaith couple. You still have to work those things out and figure out what you're going to do with your children and how you're going to be as a family together. So, in this sense, we talk about the fact that all families are interfaith families in the sense that no two people have identical beliefs and practices, even if their label is the same.
mhm. So if I hear it correctly, you're saying you and I could be sitting in the same denomination or practice the same religious tradition, but in essence, we don't necessarily believe the same thing to that extent. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes, because not everybody believes all of the things in the creed of their religion. There's a written creed, but we have research that shows in the United States, at least, that the people sitting in the pews don't necessarily believe everything that's written in the creed. People belong to a church community for many reasons. Some people go there for the community,
Mhm,
for the sense of comfort, for the music, for the ritual, um, not necessarily because they believe everything in the creed of that religion. Um, and if you force people to believe everything, they may leave. And this is what we're seeing in the United States and Europe. There's been a huge exodus from religious institutions,
mhm,
and there's many reasons for that. But I am somebody who encourages community. I think community is good for all human beings, and I think it's important to find community. And if you're an interfaith family, you have different options. You can find one community where your interfaith family feels comfortable. You can belong to more than one community as long as those communities accept that. Um, or in the case of many of the families that I write about in the book, they have created their own communities. So this book, here it is, Being Both, Embracing Two Religions in One Interfaith Family. It chronicles this grassroots movement of interfaith families coming together to create their own communities in which they can teach their children an interfaith education program, because it's not something that traditional religious institutions were encouraging or accepting or providing to them. And so they've created it for themselves. Now, this is not a new religion, but it is a support community and an educational community for these families.
You hit something on the nail, that you're promoting this interfaith education, as you mentioned, and in your book, I found that it touches on that quite a lot, on how to to create an environment where kids and children can learn how to tolerate other people from different religions, and at the end of the day be able to live with one another in a peaceful kind of manner. I mean, I was exposed to this. I think another author, Linda Mercadante, she talks about this, that you have this upsurgence of these so-called nuns, which is not a good term. Probably a good term will be seekers, people who are seeking, and we have a lot of that is actually kind of growing now, with a lot of people saying they are spiritual, but they're not religious, because they don't maybe want to be affiliated with a particular religious institution. And I want to ask you, how do you strike that balance? Because I found it when I'm at Union, where I was in a setup where there's suddenly this interfaith religions. I'm sitting in the class with someone who's coming from a Buddhist background, or Hindu background, and it's kind of fulfilling to learn a lot of things, that we have a lot of things that are more in common than different in those different religious traditions. I don't know, is that what you found, and how do you strike that balance to actually embrace other people's religious traditions for what they are, and for their own sake, not judging the other religion for what it stands for from a particular perspective?
So, my belief is that interfaith experiences and interfaith education are good for everybody. All of us benefit, whether we're from an interfaith family or a monofaith family, from interacting with people of other religions, and we benefit from learning about other religions. Um, so I believe everybody should get interfaith education, but in particular, interfaith children who have heritage in both benefit from, and frankly, I believe deserve that education about the religions in their background. You mentioned the word tolerance. I don't tend to use that word because I don't want to just tolerate another religion, or the two religions in my background. I want to embrace them and appreciate them. And tolerance sounds a little bit like you're putting up with something that you don't really like.
Yeah, embrace is a better term. Embrace is a better term, because the
Yeah.
two religions are religions in their own right. So you have to appreciate the beauty that each religion brings across, without judging it from a particular lens of some sort.
But I realize there's a fear that if I embrace somebody of another religion, do I lose part of myself somehow?
Mhm,
And that's something each person has to become comfortable with, you know how they want to do this. But I believe the more education you have, um, the easier it becomes to engage, and to be curious, and to embrace. But if you're part of an interfaith family, um, to me, you don't really have a choice about whether you're going to engage. You are engaging. You're engaging with your partner. Even if your partner agrees to, say, convert to your religion, that makes your nuclear family a monofaith family again. But again, you're gonna have extended family, your in-laws. If you have children, your children's grandparents and aunts and uncles of a different religion. So again, you want them embracing their grandparents. You want them embracing their aunts and uncles. And that's going to be easier if they understand both religions, if they understand the practices that they see, the coming of age rituals, the marriage rituals, the death rituals of both religions. Because
mhm,
you can be a monofaith nuclear family, but if your child has a grandparent of another religion, chances are they're going to end up at that grandparent's memorial or funeral. And you
mhm,
want them to understand what they're experiencing in that really important liminal moment.
mhm. I think you mentioned something quite key as well, as you talk, which is one thing I want to get segue into it. You talk about that engagement, and I know in our ministry we promote this. We embrace this multiplicity of perspective from different traditions that people come with. Um, how would you then envisage this healthy dialogue, interfaith dialogue that one's got to embrace from this multiplicity of religions and traditions that one finds themselves as they try and bring up children in these interfaith homes? How do we foster that dialogue that is very healthy for our people going forward?
Yeah. So listening is key, as you know. Um, Listening with humility, listening without trying to rebut what the person is saying in your mind, trying to keep that open mind as you listen. Um, After my first book came out, I began hearing from couples who wanted me to help them in their interfaith relationships. And I do some of that work now as a coach. But in 2019, I think you mentioned I wrote this second book, the Interfaith Family Journal. And this is a workbook that helps couples to figure out how they want to be as an interfaith family and how to interact with each other. So it has writing prompts. You write and then you exchange journals and you read what your partner wrote. And then there's dialogue prompts. And then there's even creative activities that you can do together. And I wrote it with interfaith couples in mind. But what people have told me is it's helpful no matter who you are. And actually, there are communities that are using this journal now to do interfaith engagement, even if they're not from interfaith families, because it asks questions like, you know, what were your practices growing up in terms of the songs and stories that your parents told you and sang to you? And what did those mean to you? Were they spiritual? Were they religious? Were they more cultural? And do you want to share them now with your family, with your friends? And why? Is it because of religion? Is it because it's spirituality? Is it because of culture? So these kinds of open-ended questions work to help people figure out how to communicate about religious topics, which sometimes people aren't used to talking about those topics with each other. But if you're in an interfaith family, you're going to have to talk about them.
Okay. Um, Susan, you bring out something quite key when in your book, and it's quite fascinating to me when I looked at it, that we have this dynamism that is happening in interfaith families, and we know that we live in different contexts, and people experience religion and life as a whole in different ways based on the context we are exposed to. But now, how would you envisage these dynamism of interfaith families going forward? Because we know no religion is static; they're all evolving to becoming something else. What we know today is not something that is going to be tomorrow. But what do you foresee happening with these interfaith families going into the future?
So here in the United States, we have some of these statistics that 1 in 5 American adults now have actually grown up in an interfaith home. So it's becoming more common. I think since 2010, almost 40% of marriages have been interfaith in some way. A lot of those are Christians married to secular humanists or religious nuns, NONE, as you mentioned. Um, and so this rise of interfaith families is going to kind of shake up the religious landscape and have an effect. And it's going to be very interesting to see. I am right now interested in people from interfaith families who become interfaith activists and peacemakers who are inspired by their interfaith family to take leadership roles in interfaith engagement, interfaith programming. And this is new because there was a time when someone would organize an interfaith event, and that would mean, say, a minister, a rabbi, and an imam get up on stage and talk about what they have in common and what their differences are, and then all shake hands and then come down off the stage. And the implicit idea here was that they would stay in their own religious silo and be deepened in their connection to their own religious identity through contact with other religions. And that's fine. But increasingly, what we're seeing is people who come from interfaith families. And so they are kind of dancing between those religious boxes, between the religious silos. And that was threatening to the idea of interfaith dialogue between two religions, the assumption that no one would shift or change or come outside their box and stay there. But now this is where we are. A lot of us do bridge these boundaries. We do cross the boundaries. And to me, it's very interesting to see how that's going to affect interfaith engagement and programming and how it's going to affect the world.
Wow, that's very insightful, Susan. And tell me, have you received any pushback? I know a lot of people, we are conditioned or socialized in different ways, and we are taught maybe that to view a religion, that no religions can kind of dialogue together. I know you would have maybe, of course, received some pushback against this promotion of this interfaith communities and dialogues within communities. I don't. Is there something that you received in your experience, and how or did you deal with it, if so?
There's certainly pushback from religious institutions that want you to choose one religion. They I sympathize, I empathize, because I think a lot of institutions are panicked now. They're losing adherents, and they want you to choose their religion, you know? But, and, it's a question of market share if you wanna look at it that way. But, I can't worry about that. I'm already a generation beyond that. My parents chose to become an interfaith couple and create an interfaith family. And I was very happy in my interfaith family growing up. My parents had an incredible relationship. They were married, more than 50 years until they died. And so I have lived with the benefits of a happy interfaith marriage. So to me, I'm just way beyond the pushback over whether you can or should have an interfaith family. And in terms of interfaith dialogue and engagement and programming, to me, it's essential. It's essential. We have to create a more peaceful world, and speaking to each other across difference is essential. And that means not just the common ground, but the differences. The differences are important. I am not, as an interfaith child or an interfaith activist, trying to merge all the religions into one thing. I don't even use the word merge. I have respect for the differences. And that's why you will notice on the cover of my book, it's a Venn diagram. It's two circles overlapping. So the common ground is the center where they're overlapping, and that's a really important space. But the differences where they don't overlap is also very important.
Yeah. I think it was quite key that you mentioned that, because as we said earlier on, that there's so many similarities that we have, whether we know it or not, and also differences that are there, because no religions are identical of themselves. So each religion brings something of its own, and to some extent, somehow they connect in this commonality that we do see. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who go to church, particularly from where I am, and that during the week they'll be happy to go and visit a traditional healer to help them with a particular problem, but they kind of ashamed to talk about that aspect of their life, because people tend to look down on them when they do that sort of thing. But people are doing these things not because they are want to think about it logically, but they're trying to find solutions as they experience life, not necessarily that logically this has to tie up completely. And we know such a thing doesn't exist. And tell me, in your book, you talk about this oneness, that going forward, how do you envisage that we have this communities that are very helpful and healthy going into the future? I think you touched on it anyhow. Could you perhaps maybe even elaborate more on how do you see this panning out into the future? Because it seems like it is the future for us, where people are going to come out boldly to say we're embracing this interfaith religions as we grow our families and households.
Yeah. What became clear to me, having lived on 3 continents, was that our religions are tied, closely with our cultures. The whole
Mhm,
idea of religion is to some extent a, Christian worldview. Many cultures didn't even have words for religion. It was tied up intimately with culture. So, as human beings across the globe, we have many religions because we've grown up in many different geographic areas with many cultures.
mhm,
And a lot of us have grown up in places that have layers of culture. Maybe you have a traditional, very ancient, indigenous culture, and then you have layered on top of that a colonial culture that came in often with Islam or with Christianity. Um, or you might have another culture that's living adjacent to you geographically that has had an influence. And these are, in a sense, accidents of time and history and geography.
mhm,
And so we are all products of our histories, of our geographies, of our cultures. And there should not be any shame in drawing on all of that. It's a richness, it's a cultural richness. It's our birthrights, it's our inheritances. And to the extent to which it's helpful for you to practice any and all parts of that culture and history, then there should not be any shame attached to it. And so when I talk about myself as an activist, that is part of my work, is helping people to feel comfortable claiming all of the culture that's influenced them and their family and their extended family and their partner's extended family, and to the extent to which it's helpful to them, to celebrate it.
Aha. You say something quite key, that you are helping people embrace where they come from and what helps them to move forward. Have you seen some attitude changes in the way people have received your work, and has that helped to promote this interfaith families and communities where you are located specifically?
To ensure that we keep bringing you tough conversations like these, please support our ministry by donating as little as 50 Rand per month. You can find our banking details on our website, hulusoministries.co.za.
Yes, I am seeing a lot of positive movement, more openness towards these ideas. And it's interesting because this is the 10th anniversary of Being Both, the book I published exactly 10 years ago last month. And as we come to the end of this 10th anniversary year, I'm celebrating by bringing out an audiobook edition of the book, which did not exist before. And for that audiobook edition, I wrote a new author's note reflecting on the past 10 years and the changes that have occurred. And for instance, in the Jewish community, I see a lot more openness, a lot more inclusivity. A couple of the rabbinical seminaries have shifted to allow rabbinical students who are in interfaith marriages to become rabbis, and that didn't exist 10 years ago, only existed in a few of the very smaller seminaries. So I see progress, and I don't think it's because of my book necessarily. I think it's mainly because of the demographics. Okay, the
Mhm.
numbers. There are so many interfaith families now that institutions, seminaries have to take note They have to engage with this topic. They have to accept people from interfaith families. And to some degree, they're going to have to understand why people want to draw on more than one religion, whether that's their indigenous religion or their African diasporic religion or the religions in their interfaith family. And I want to say that I very much appreciate that Union Theological Seminary, has a course in this topic about double belonging. And it needs to be at every seminary in America, because if you're graduating clergy into a world where, 1 in 5 adults grew up in an interfaith family, and then on top of that, all of the people that are double belonging by claiming their indigenous or African diasporic religions, that's a lot of people. And clergy need to be prepared to engage with these families and support them. So I hope that all seminaries soon will be drawing on my work, teaching my book, and doing courses in multiple religious practice.
Yeah, I'd also like to push you on that, to not only limit it to the United States, but also push it to Africa and other places as
Globally,
because
yes.
people do have to embrace their being both in double belonging, because that's how people are wired. That's them finding life, meaning into life. And I know at Union is probably the only place that I've come across, because I am there, that teaches this double belonging, and they embrace that. So it'll be great to do that, as you mentioned. But we're running out of time, Susan. And before I let you go, I would like you to perhaps touch on the fact that your book has been instrumental. I know you've been humble about it, but I know it certainly has been one of the powerful books out there on religious multiplicity. Have you received any positive notes from people who have engaged in your book to say, this is how this book has actually helped me to shape my experience and help me to live probably a better life and have a better perspective in life?
Absolutely. And what's very thrilling for me is when clergy in formation read it, and I feel that it then is going to affect their work, their mission in the world, because that has a ripple effect. And that's very encouraging. I also want to mention that I created on Facebook a private group called the Network of Interfaith Family Groups for anybody anywhere in the world practicing any two religions or one religion and secular humanism. And you can find each other there and get support there. So that's another part of my work that I wanted to mention.
Oh, great. So I was going to come to that before I let you go. Just to say, where else can people, get hold of your work? Do you have? I know you have an online presence. You have a site. Is there any other means where people can get hold of your work? And is there any
Yeah.
other thing you're working on currently that you would like people to know about going forward?
Yes. All of my work is tied into my website, which is susankatzmiller.com. And another new project that you'll see there is that I co-created a curriculum for people teaching world religions, or Religion 101 in high schools, in community colleges, in universities. And there's a new YouTube series, video series that I created with that, and it's called Got More Than One Religion? You know? So you can find all of that through susankatzmiller.com.
Oh, fantastic, Susan! It's been certainly great. I've learned a lot from what we have discussed today, and I certainly hope our viewers at home have found this, conversation intriguing and validate a lot of their experiences, because people do go through this, and some people may think they're crazy, but it's something that is happening out there. It's just that we encourage that they go out there and learn and embrace their multiplicity. Thank you so much, Susan, for your time and for the wisdom that you have shared with our audience.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Until next time, we'll talk again, perhaps about your next project that you are working on. We'll take you up on that offer to come and tell us more about where to go from here. Thank you very much, audience. I certainly hope you've enjoyed it at home and you have learned a lot about multiplicity and embracing being both. Thank you very much. Until next time, goodbye and God bless. Puluso Ministries is a non-profit educational enterprise founded in 2019. The ministry is informed by academic scholarship. At Puluso, we embrace multiple perspectives in our engagement with Scripture. We seek to provide non-Christians and Christians from all backgrounds and denominations with resources that provide an honest intellectual engagement with the Bible. We embrace multiple perspectives in fostering a more open, moderate society into the 21st century and beyond.